You are a paramedic who drives an ambulance for the government. Marco runs power lines for Hydro One. This wedding is going to be in every business publication from here to Bay Street, and I will not let either of you anywhere near it. My mother set down her wine glass, Niagara Peninsula Chardonnay, the bottle angled so the label faced the room, and dragged her eyes over my Lululemon jacket the way a customs officer scans a suspicious bag. Then she reached across the kitchen island and picked up the ivory envelope that had been sitting beside my coffee mug. She looked at it for one long, deliberate second. Then she walked to the kitchen sink and dropped it into the green bin beneath the counter. Not the recycling, the compost, alongside the coffee grounds and the wilted lettuce from 4 days ago. She let the lid fall shut with a soft, clean click. Then she turned around, leaned against the counter, and looked at me the way she used to look at report cards I'd brought home when I was 9, patient, disappointed, already past any version of the conversation where the outcome changed. Serena is marrying into one of the most connected families in the country. The rehearsal dinner alone had 3 senators and the president of the Royal Bank of Canada at the same table. She smoothed the front of her blazer. Your presence would make her nervous. And a nervous bride is the one thing I will not allow. She straightened a dish towel hanging from the oven handle that didn't need straightening. Stay home. I'll have the caterer send something. The coffee in my mug had gone cold while she was talking. I hadn't touched it. Beside me, at the kitchen table, my husband sat with his hands wrapped around his own mug. I could see the ridge of scar tissue running from the base of his right thumb past his wrist, permanent, smooth, the color of old wax, where the arc flash had found him 3 years ago on a frozen night north of Huntsville. He said nothing. He didn't need to. I looked at my mother. I kept my voice flat and even. All right, I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair, walked to the front door, and pulled it shut behind me. No argument, no raised voice, nothing she could quote back to anyone. I had learned a long time ago that the cleanest exit doesn't give them anything to hold. My husband followed 30 seconds later. We drove home in silence. But she had absolutely no idea what was already in motion, because 4 hours after Serena's wedding ceremony began on the grounds of Langdon Hall Estate in Cambridge, 4 RCMP vehicles with federal plates pulled into our driveway. The sergeant who stepped out onto our front step said 8 words that rearranged that entire afternoon. The Honorable Coyle is requesting your presence, ma'am. Before I tell you what that meant, let me take you back far enough so you understand what my mother had spent 38 years building, and what she'd been terrified of everyone finding out. My mother came from Sudbury. She will tell you she came from the north shore of Lake Huron, which is technically accurate, but Sudbury is what she means, and Sudbury is what she has been running from since she was 22. She married my father, who was a plumber from Timmins, and spent the next 2 decades treating that fact the way some people treat a diagnosis, something to be managed, minimized, eventually reversed. She redecorated every room of the house they built together in the Garson subdivision, changed the furniture, changed the curtains, changed the neighborhood as soon as the market let her. The one thing she couldn't change was him. He was a big, quiet man with permanently calloused hands and the same green Carhartt work jacket 5 days a week, and he thought a genuinely good Saturday was the Leafs on television with a bowl of popcorn in his lap and one of us leaning against his shoulder. He called me his Faye bug. He called my sister Rena Bird. He said the 2 best things he'd ever built were us, and unlike most of what my father built, those words have held up. He had a heart attack on a job site in Barrie when I was 11. He was 53. The ambulance got there in 4 minutes. It wasn't fast enough. My mother had the green work jacket bagged for donation before the 40 days were out. After that, she turned her full attention to my sister, older with my mother's cheekbones and my father's easy confidence, which my mother had decided to reframe as sophistication. She enrolled her in etiquette programs. She redirected the life insurance payout into the right schools, the right charity circuit, the right galas, where the right people would notice her. It worked. It took 12 years, but it worked. My sister met Connor Ashby at a Venture for Canada event in Toronto, and 6 months later, he proposed at a restaurant where the tasting menu alone was $400 a plate. I watched my mother cry real tears at the announcement dinner. I had never seen that before. For me, she had different plans, which mostly meant no plans at all. When I was 17, I was accepted into the Biomedical Sciences program at McMaster on partial scholarship. I wrote the application myself, mailed it myself at the Garson post office, and checked the letterbox every day for 6 weeks. My mother opened the envelope before I got home from school. By the time I walked in, she had already decided. Your sister needs the guest bedroom converted into a proper dressing room this season. The scholarship doesn't cover the full tuition, and we are not taking on a student loan for this. She handed me the letter, still folded, still in its original crease. There's an ACP diploma program at Cambrian. 2 years, then you have a trade and you can start contributing. I stood in the front hallway holding that envelope with both hands. She hadn't torn it, the paper was still perfect. I enrolled at Cambrian in September. I got my advanced care paramedic certification 8 years later through continuous upgrading in night courses and study sessions in the break room at 3 in the morning with a Tim Hortons going cold on the desk beside me. I did it on my own time and my own dime, and I never once asked her to acknowledge it. My husband I met on a call, cardiac arrest at a construction site in Greater Sudbury, my original district. He was the Hydro 1 crew supervisor who had the site cleared and CPR underway before we arrived. When we loaded the patient and I looked up, he was still there at the edge of the perimeter, hard hat in his hand, not leaving until he was sure the person made it into the truck. I got his name afterward through the patient's next of kin, which is the only mildly unprofessional thing I have done in 12 years working calls. He was worth it. He proposed in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire in North Bay. He'd meant to do it somewhere else, somewhere with a view, but the ring had been in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks and he finally could not wait another day. He went down on one knee on the asphalt and I said yes before he finished asking. The ring was white gold and he'd had it engraved inside, still the call I always answer. He thought of that himself. My mother called our marriage marrying down. She said it to my aunt at our rehearsal dinner, in that particular voice that wants to be overheard without being cited. My husband heard her. The dent in our kitchen wall, which I've since painted over, told me what his silence didn't. The arc flash that scarred my husband's arm happened on a February night 3 years ago. His Hydro 1 crew was restoring power to a stretch of Highway 60 near Huntsville during an ice storm, a stretch that included a long-term care home that had gone dark at midnight in -23 weather. The safe restoration protocol required de-energizing the entire section, which would have kept the care home offline for another 6 hours. His crew made the call to work live. The arc flash came without warning. Thermal event, half a second. He took it across his right forearm and the inside of his right hand. 3rd degree, Sunnybrook burn unit, 4 months of occupational therapy. He was back on his crew in 6 months. He never filed for the enhanced injury premium the collective agreement entitled him to. He said the home stayed lit, and that was the whole story. My mother sent a card, a grocery store sympathy card, signed with her full name. The months leading up to my sister's wedding had their own particular weather. My mother's requests arrived by text every few days. Could I pre-authorize my line of credit for the engagement party venue deposit? She'd settle it by end of quarter. Could I transfer $700 to the florist holding account because a payment had bounced? Could I co-sign a credit application because her own application had been flagged? I did some of it, not because I was naive, because I still had some residual belief that my father would have wanted us to try to keep this family intact, and I kept confusing that belief with a reason. What I found out 4 months before the wedding, through a credit bureau alert on my phone at 6 in the morning, was that my mother had used my co-signature to open a secondary credit line I had never authorized. $61,000. Every cent of it was documented in my sister's wardrobe, the lifestyle photographer she'd hired for the engagement period, the first-class seat to Paris that my mother called the final fittings trip. When I confronted her, she said I was being small. She said I was trying to undermine Serena because I resented what she had built. She said, and I remember the phrasing exactly, "Your sister is creating a future that will open doors for this entire family. You drive an ambulance. The least you can do is carry your share." I called my bank the next morning and placed a fraud hold on everything accessible through that co-signature. I said nothing else to anyone. The morning of the wedding, I was up at 5:30. My husband made eggs, the radio was on. Outside the kitchen window, the Ontario summer sat flat and heavy and humid the way it does in August before the heat has broken. I drank my coffee at the counter looking out at the backyard, at the cedar bird feeder my husband had built that winter from scrap lumber, at the hummingbirds working it in the low morning light. At 9, a courier van came, a white insulated catering bag, left on the front step without knocking. Inside, a single portion of the wedding's pre-ceremony brunch. Eggs Benedict with Nova Scotia smoked salmon still warm in its foil container. Underneath it, a note card in my mother's handwriting, the looping, deliberate script she uses when she wants something to look elegant. "So you feel included, please don't call during the reception," signed with her small, dramatic M. My husband read the card. He set it face down on the counter. He carried the catering bag out to the blue bin at the side of the house and came back in and washed his hands at the sink. He didn't say a word, neither did I. We sat in the living room for a while, neither of us watching the television that was on. Then the air changed. Not a sound at first, a vibration, the low-frequency resonance of multiple heavy-duty engines moving in close formation, the kind of sound I recognize from 12 years of working calls. My husband was on his feet before I processed it consciously. He went to the front window and separated the curtain with 2 fingers. He stood that way for a moment. Then he turned back, and his expression held something I had never seen before. Not fear, not exactly. Something unprecedented. 4 RCMP vehicles, black, federal plates, no markings, had arranged themselves in a tight formation across our driveway and the front of the street. The doors opened in unison. 8 officers in dark suits stepped out, then 4 more from the rear vehicle. 12. Not in uniform, not traffic division. The way they moved and held the perimeter, this was close protection work. I walked to the front door and opened it before anyone reached the step. The sergeant who came forward was a woman, early 40s, with a pale scar running along her left jaw. She held an RCMP identification wallet open at chest height. "Faye," she said. "Yes." "Surgeon Hebert, we're here on behalf of the Honorable Edmund Coyle. He's attending a private event this afternoon and has specifically requested your presence." She held my gaze. "Will you come with us?" The name landed somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there. Edmund Coyle, former federal deputy prime minister, retired from public life 4 years ago, currently on the boards of 2 of the 5 major chartered banks and the executive committee of the country's largest pension fund manager. The name I had heard exactly once before, spoken quietly, in an RCMP interview room in Kamloops, British Columbia, on a Tuesday morning after the worst shift of my career. I kept my face level. What event? Sergeant Hebert's expression didn't move. "Langdon Hall Estate, Cambridge. I think you know the rest." I did. I gave myself 5 minutes. I went to the bedroom closet and reached past my husband's work coveralls and my off-shift clothes until my fingers found the dry cleaning bag at the back. Inside, my paramedic dress uniform. Deep navy, brass insignia, 3 service stripes at the sleeve, the citation bar above the left breast pocket that almost no one who knew me had ever thought to ask about. I dressed methodically, the way I prep for a complex call, nothing skipped, no shortcuts. I pinned the citation bar last. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for exactly as long as it took to verify everything was straight. My husband was standing in the hallway when I came out. He looked at me the way he'd looked at the care home after the ice storm. Like something that mattered had been kept safe through a difficult night. He didn't ask where I was going. He already knew that wherever it was, I was ready. The convoy moved through Cambridge at authorized speed, the kind that parts traffic on the 401 without anyone needing to think about it. I sat in the back of the lead vehicle and looked out at the flat Ontario countryside, the silos and windbreaks and the sugar maples at the edge of the fields beginning to turn, and I let my memory travel back to the shift that had started all of this. 3 years ago, I was 3 weeks into a northern and remote posting in Kamloops, BC, a professional development rotation that my service offered experienced ACPs. We'd been working 12-hour shifts in July heat, most of it wildfire adjacent, smoke inhalation assessments, cardiac stress in evacuees, a scatter of structure fire injuries along the Coquihalla corridor. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. multi-vehicle accident, Highway 1 eastbound, 18 kilometers west of the city. A federal transport convoy had encountered a truck that crossed the center line. My unit was closest. When we arrived, 3 vehicles were involved. A provincial truck burning 40 meters off the shoulder, 2 passenger vehicles in the center of the highway, and a black government-plated SUV that had rolled and come to rest on its passenger side. I could see from 30 meters that the driver and front passenger weren't moving. I could also see a hand pressed against the cracked rear window, an old man's hand, fingers spread wide, pushing. My partner called for extraction support. Protocol with an active fuel risk says you wait for the fire department ladder crew. The burning truck was still going. The SUV's tank was pooling. The correct calculations said, wait. I ran. I crossed 20 meters of open highway with a window punch from my kit and shattered the rear glass of the SUV. I reached in with both arms and I found him, white-haired, conscious but fading, a gash above his left eye, suit soaked in fuel. I told him my name. I told him I had him. He tried to speak, and I told him not to talk, just breathe, just hold on. 6 minutes to get him clear. 6 minutes of shattered glass and heat and fuel smell thick enough to taste. When we had him on the stretcher and I was cutting his jacket open to assess, the truck's tank went. The concussion flattened both of us into the shoulder gravel. I covered his body with mine. We were far enough away by that point, not comfortable but far enough. In the ambulance on the way to Royal Inland, he was in and out. At one point, he gripped my wrist and said, precisely and deliberately, "I want to know your name." I told him. 2 days later, through the RCMP detachment where I was interviewed for the incident report, I received a handwritten note. "I owe you everything. The debt stands. EC." My supervisors had the file classified, my name redacted from all public documentation. Edmund Coyle was not supposed to be on Highway 1 that night. His government flight had been canceled 6 hours earlier, and his alternate routing had not been cleared through proper security channels, which was itself part of a review. I was asked, politely and firmly, to say nothing. I said nothing. Not to my colleagues, not to my service director, not to my husband on the nights when the memory came back without warning. The hand against the glass, the fuel smell, the concussion rolling across the gravel. My mother spent 3 years calling me a government employee on a mediocre salary. The convoy turned off the county road and onto the long private lane of Langdon Hall. The Georgian manor sat at the end of it, surrounded by August gardens, the kind that look effortless because someone has worked very hard for a very long time to make them appear that way. Catering vans lined the lane. I could hear a string quartet through the vehicle window. We did not slow at the estate's security gate. Sergeant Hebert extended her identification, and the gate opened. We pulled around the circular drive and stopped at the main entrance. I stepped out. The afternoon sun caught the brass on my dress uniform and scattered light in 3 directions. The ceremony was over. The reception was in progress on the garden terrace. At least 200 guests in silk and linen stood between me and the far end of the terrace, where I could already see the head table. The RCMP detail fanned out on either side of me, and I walked through the center of it all at the measured pace you use when you're managing a scene, and you need everything around you to understand that the situation is under control. The whispering began at my left and moved outward in a wave. I found them at the head table before they found me. My mother first, mid-sentence, addressing the woman beside her, and she stopped with her mouth still open. The color left her face the way it leaves a patient in early circulatory shock. Starting from the edges, working inward. Her champagne flute tipped in her hand, she caught it. My sister sat 3 places to the left. Her dress had been the centerpiece of the entire terrace, ivory and architectural, worth every dollar of the $61,000 my mother had borrowed against my name to assemble the wardrobe it was part of. She saw me and put one hand flat on the table as if she needed the surface to remain upright. My brother-in-law rose halfway from his chair without seeming to know he was doing it. His eyes moved from my face to the RCMP formation and back again, and what settled on his expression was the particular calculation of a man who has just realized the terms of something have shifted entirely. The crowd parted. Edmund Coyle walked through the center of the space with the careful patience of a man who has learned not to rush what his body needs time to do. He was 71, white-haired, upright, with the bearing of someone who has spent decades in rooms where precise language carried real consequence. He used a cane, dark wood, brass ferrule. He had seen me the moment I stepped out of the vehicle. I could tell by the way he moved directly toward me without looking anywhere else. I brought my heels together and came to attention. He stopped 2 paces from me and looked at me for a long moment, the specific look of a person who has been trying to remember something correctly for a long time and is relieved to find they got it right. Then he stepped forward and took both of my hands in both of his. "Faye," he said. His voice was clear and steady and loud enough for the people immediately surrounding us to hear without effort. "I have been looking for the right moment to say this to you for 3 years." He paused. "I've concluded there isn't one, there's only this." He turned, still holding my right hand, and faced the assembled guests of his goddaughter's wedding. Because my sister was his goddaughter. My mother had mentioned it once, 2 years ago, and I had not thought until this moment to connect it to anything. 3 years ago, he said, to 500 people holding their breath, I was in a vehicle accident on a highway in British Columbia. My security detail was incapacitated. My vehicle had rolled and was beginning to burn. I could not open the door. He stopped. Let the silence hold its shape. This woman, who was on temporary posting with her EMS service, disobeyed the protocol that instructed her to hold position and wait for ladder crew. She ran across open highway to a burning government vehicle and pulled me out through the window with her bare hands. She covered my body with hers when the fuel tank detonated behind us. Another pause, longer. She refused every form of compensation offered to her. She requested that the file be classified. She has not said a word about any of it to anyone, including the family celebrating with us here today. My mother made a sound, small, involuntary, the sound a person makes when the air leaves them faster than they expected. Edmund Coyle released my hand and turned to face the head table directly. "I want to be clear about something," he said. His voice had dropped a register, quieter now, and carrying the specific weight of a man who had once stood in the House of Commons and understood precisely how much a sentence can contain. "I was informed this morning, by people at this table, that Faye was on operational deployment and unable to attend today. I was told this by people who were aware that I had been actively looking for her. I was told this by people who knew I knew her name. My mother's chair scraped back. Edmund, I was protecting her operational security, her privacy. She wouldn't want the attention. You put her wedding invitation in the bin. The words came out low and controlled and 10 times more final than a shout. I was told that by the sergeant outside before we came in. Do not add to this. The silence on the terrace was the kind that has physical weight. The fountain at the far edge of the garden was audible. The string quartet somewhere inside the manor, still playing to an empty room. Edmund Coyle turned back to 500 guests and let his voice carry to the edges of the property. This country is built by people who drive ambulances in the dark and restore power in ice storms and run toward things that are on fire. They earn what the market decides they're worth, which is consistently wrong. And there are people who construct very elaborate structures on top of that work and present them as their own achievement. He looked, briefly, at my sister. Then he looked away. I know which kind of person I owe my life to. I thought it was important that her family know it too. My brother-in-law had sat back down. He was looking at my sister with the expression of someone reviewing a contract they had signed without reading the full terms. My sister's hands were folded in her lap. Her shoulders had come inward. The diamond tiara she was wearing had shifted slightly to the left, and she did not reach up to correct it. My mother stood at the edge of the terrace with an expression I had never seen from her before in 38 years. Not anger, not disappointment. Something broken and exposed underneath both of those. The way a wall looks when you pull back the drywall and find the water damage has been running far longer than the surface suggested. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. What I felt was the specific exhaustion that comes at the end of a very long and difficult shift. That moment when you've handed off the last patient and you're walking to your car and you realize your hands are still trembling slightly and you won't fully understand the weight of what just happened until you slept. Sergeant Hebert appeared at my elbow. She said quietly that Mr. Coyle had a private room available if I needed a moment. I thanked her. I said I was all right. I found my mother on the stone terrace off the south wing 20 minutes later. She was standing with her arms wrapped around her own ribs, looking at the flagstone. She had been crying and had tried to correct it back into composure quickly enough that the evidence remained, and the composure hadn't fully arrived. My sister came out a minute after. She stood slightly behind our mother, without the tiara. My mother spoke first, Faye. Her voice had a quality I had never heard in it. I didn't know what Edmund was to you. I didn't know any of it. I know you didn't. I need you to speak with Connor. Explain to him that the credit line, it was for the family, for Serena's future. If you say something to Edmund, if he makes one phone call. No. She looked up. I'm not calling Edmund Coyle on your behalf. I held her gaze without difficulty. I'm not calling anyone. My sister stepped forward. Her voice came out fractured and too fast, the way it had when she was 9 and was trying to get ahead of the consequences of something. Connor had his lawyer pull the financial disclosure this afternoon during the reception. He saw the credit line. He saw my name on the applications. She grabbed the sleeve of my uniform jacket with both hands. He thinks I planned it with Mum. Faye, if you don't say something. I removed her hands from my sleeve, not rough, just removed them. You sat in that kitchen, I said. You watched our mother drop my invitation into the bin, and you said nothing. You wore a wardrobe funded by $61,000 borrowed against my name, and you knew where the money came from, and you put it on anyway. I looked at her for a moment. I forgive you. I mean that genuinely. But forgiveness and assistance are not the same thing, and I'm done treating them like they are. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. The fraud hold is on the credit line. My bank will be in touch about repayment terms. Whatever happens with Connor, that's between you and him and the prenuptial agreement you signed. I buttoned the top button of my jacket. Go put out the fire you started. I'm done holding the hose for this family. I walked back through the manor, past the string quartet, past the catering staff, past the clusters of guests speaking in voices meant to sound as though the last hour hadn't happened. I thanked Sergeant Haber by name. She nodded once. The drive home took 40 minutes on the 401. The August light was going orange by the time we turned onto our street. I thanked the officers. I stood in the driveway for a moment in the early evening heat in full dress uniform, in the quiet of a neighborhood where most families were eating dinner right now with the windows open. I went inside. My husband was at the stove. He turned when he heard the screen door, looked at me, at the uniform, at whatever was on my face, and he opened his arms without asking a single question. I crossed the kitchen and leaned into him and stood there for a long time with my face against his collarbone, breathing in dish soap and whatever was on the stove, And underneath everything, the faint, persistent layering of Hydro One coveralls that never fully washes out no matter how many times they go through the laundry. No tasting menu, no crystal stemware, no curated centerpieces or string quartet or 500 witnesses. Just this, a kitchen with a window above the sink, a husband with a scarred arm, a cedar bird feeder outside that needed refilling, and the specific quiet satisfaction of knowing your own worth so thoroughly that it no longer requires anyone else to name it. The aftermath arranged itself over the following weeks without any participation from me. My brother-in-law's legal team activated the Asset Protection Clause in the prenuptial agreement, the clause specifying financial misrepresentation as grounds for dissolution of community property rights, the clause my sister had signed without reading past the first 4 pages. She walked away from the marriage with her clothing and a story she had written herself out of stolen money and other people's identities. My mother's secondary credit line came due in September. The private lender she'd arranged, the one Edmund Coyle mentioned, calmly and precisely, to my brother-in-law's attorney when they called him the day after the wedding, initiated collection proceedings. My mother called me every Sunday for 2 months. Long messages, different proportions of apology and scripture, and the specific phrasing of a person who has exhausted every other option and is cycling back to the one that used to work. I listened to the first one, then I set up a call filter and set the phone face down on the counter. Some surgeries are not optional. You can decline them as long as you choose, but the thing requiring the surgery does not stop growing while you wait. One morning in September, early before my shift, my husband poured 2 mugs of coffee, black, the way we both drink it, and set one in front of me and sat down across the kitchen table. Outside the window, the hummingbirds were still at the cedar feeder. I'd thought they'd have gone south by now. Late going this year, he said. I watched one hover at the feeder's rim, that precise, impossible stillness in the middle of all that motion, and thought, yes, but they always leave when it's time. And until then, they stay exactly where conditions are right. The person with real wealth is not the one with the most access to other people's labor. The person with real wealth is the one who, at the end of a very long and difficult day, sits down in a kitchen they chose, with someone they chose, and knows, without performance, without audience, without waiting for anyone else to confirm it, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. I have never needed anyone to drop my invitation in the bin a second time.